Dragonlith City had completely turned into a living hell now. In just half a day, the entire Dragonlith City had collapsed. The millions of cities were instantly captured by the parasitic species. Moreover, most of the parasites had already parasitized the humans in Dragonlith City. Be it children, elderly, men, women, or even martial artists, they were all parasitized. This time, the parasites were even more vicious. Although the parasites were also very difficult to deal with last time, at least they could not parasitize martial artists who had broken the genetic lock. But now, not only were metamorphic realm martial artists who had broken the genetic lock parasitized, even divine realm martial artists who had undergone 2 life transitions could not escape the fate of being parasitized. What was even more terrifying was that the parasite's target did not seem to be just Dragonlith City. After basically occupying Dragonlith City, the parasites also spread to the cities around Dragonlith City. Once they spread, the consequences would be unthinkable. Humanity was facing a true calamity. At this moment, there were still some people hiding in Dragonlith City. They were not parasitized by the insects, but they were barely surviving. Once they were discovered, only death awaited them. A little boy was stuffed into the closet by his mother. He watched helplessly as his mother was parasitized by the insect. The little boy was strong enough not to cry out loud and continued to hide in the closet. However, a parasite still caught the little boy's scent and suddenly tore the closet apart. The little boy's eyes were filled with fear. Boom! Suddenly, a dazzling hand grabbed the parasite and crushed it. At the same time, 4 airships flew over from the sky, and 4 sages walked out. The invincible fist sage brought the little boy into the airship and said in a low voice, "Stay here for now. Uncle, are you going to kill those parasites?" "Yes, I'm going to kill those parasites and save more people." "Uncle, I'll stay here quietly." "Uncle, please avenge Mom." The boy's eyes were bloodshot, but he stayed strong and did not cry. The tragedy in Dragonlith City forced a child who was only about 10 to mature in an instant. The invincible fist sage felt a faint twinge in his heart. It was because of his negligence that the entire Dragonlith City had become a dead city. All the parasites deserved to die. The invincible fist sage's killing intent soared. Hence, he unleashed the divine kingdom of fire completely. The number of people who were still alive in the entire Dragonlith City could be counted on one hand. The invincible fist sage did not have any reservations as he deployed the divine kingdom of fire. Enveloped in the divine kingdom, all the parasites were burned to ashes by the flames. Regardless of whether these parasites had the ability to regenerate, how could they regenerate after being burned to ashes? How terrifying was the wrath of a sage! The invincible fist sage attacked in rage. The divine kingdom enveloped a radius of 1 kilometer, and all the parasites were burned to ashes. Enveloped by the divine kingdom, be they ordinary parasites, ordinary demons, or demon generals, they were all helplessly burned to ashes. The most terrifying regenerative ability of the parasites was completely countered by the divine kingdom of the sages. For a moment, the 4 sages attacked with all their might, clearing out all the parasites in 4 directions. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The parasites began to feel fear. They fled in all directions in a frenzy. However, no matter how they fled, how could they escape the cover of the sages' divine kingdoms? The astral power of the sages was nigh infinite. The divine kingdoms formed from astral power were the supreme killing weapons on the battlefield. Numbers were meaningless to sages. As the 4 sages swept through, all the parasites in Dragonlith City began to flee in panic. Countless parasites surrounded a tall building in the center of Dragonlith City. The 4 sages quickly discovered the abnormality here. Hence, they gathered and advanced towards the downtown building. There must be something that these parasites value very much in this building, the invincible fist sage said coldly. No matter what it is, kill it. The invincible fist sage's divine kingdom of fire enveloped it at once. Endless flames began blazing. The invincible fist sage's divine kingdom of flames burned relentlessly. Even the entire building would be burned down. Boom! Suddenly, the building shook violently. Immediately after, countless parasites exited the building. The entire building shook violently. Then the building collapsed with a huge commotion. Amidst the dust, the four sages all sensed a strong aura of danger. The eyes of the four sages widened. What did they see? In the ruins of the building, an ugly, hideous, and massive parasite appeared. This parasite's entire body was covered in terrifying tumors. Moreover, these tumors would explode from time to time, and tiny mantis-like parasites would crawl out of them. Then they quickly spread in all directions. This giant worm is the culprit, can constantly produce ordinary parasites. In fact, all the parasites, be it ordinary parasites, those demons or those demon generals and demon kings, were all bred by this giant worm. It is the brood mother of the parasites. The four sages were all very surprised. No one had expected a brood mother to appear among the parasites this time. Moreover, the speed at which the broodmother reproduced was simply too astonishing. As long as the broodmother continued to devour things like humans and dire beasts, it would be able to constantly produce parasites. As long as there was time, it would be a piece of cake for the broodmother to produce billions of parasites. This broodmother was too terrifying. If it was allowed to reproduce, the entire human civilization would probably be destroyed in the end, especially this broodmother. It was very likely to be a demon emperor. Sages, we absolutely cannot allow the broodmother to continue reproducing. Let's join forces and kill the broodmother. The invincible fist sage's expression also turned solemn. Attack! The four sages did not hesitate at all and immediately attacked. 4 different divine kingdoms and 4 astral force fields suddenly enveloped the broodmother. The terrifying pressure distorted the air. Anger also appeared in the broodmother's huge eyes. Then, its already huge body continued to expand. A layer of scarlet light enveloped the broodmother's entire body as the 4 divine kingdoms covering its body. Various force field of flames, violent winds, and so on intertwined, firmly suppressing the broodmother. How powerful was the combined strength of 4 sages. Even the broodmother was pressed to the ground at once. Its entire body was being suppressed by the power of the divine kingdoms. Even the tentacles on its body were severed and burned by the various powers of the divine kingdom, turning into ashes. Gore! The broodmother suddenly roared at the sky. It felt as if its entire body was under incredible pressure, but it still stood up step by step. Boom! Suddenly, the broodmother's body began to expand. A faint layer of blood-colored light shone, enveloping its body. In the blink of an eye, it had already expanded to 5 kilometers. Its huge body was like a mountain stretching on without end. It stared coldly at the 4 sages, as if they were tiny ants. How is this possible? The broodmother's body must be at least 5 kilometers long, right? The invincible fist sage and the other 3 sages had already seen Lin Feng's tidal combat body, and even Dongfang Sheng's massive body. However, neither Dongfang Sheng nor Lin Feng were as massive as this broodmother before them. Lin Feng's tidal combat body was only 3 kilometers long, but the broodmother before them actually had a body of 5 kilometers. Just the sight of such a massive body made them despair. Divine Kingdom of Fire. The invincible fist sage was called invincible because of his extraordinary strength. His entire body transformed into a ball of flames, and he charged towards the broodmother with unparalleled force. Thud! With a muffled sound, the invincible fist sage's figure appeared again. However, he was in a sorry state. His full power strike could not even break the broodmother's skin. How huge was the gap? Rumble! The giant broodmother's body shook slightly, and the invincible fist sage was sent flying. The astral force field on his body was completely disrupted and shattered. He could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. They were not its match at all. At the same time, the broodmother's massive body pressed down hard on the invincible fist sage and the other 3 sages. Immediately, countless streets and tall buildings collapsed, like a magnitude 10 earthquake. Even many parasites were directly crushed to death. Forget about fighting, even a slight touch would injure them. This was on a completely different level. Go, go, go quickly! Such a demon has probably already surpassed ordinary demon emperors. Even Dongfang Sheng back then was definitely not this broodmother's match, right? The invincible fist sage and the others were very shocked. The broodmother in front of them had already exceeded their imagination. Forget about the 4 mere sages. Even if all the sages joined forces, they would definitely not be its match. The broodmother roared. The tentacles on its body suddenly curled towards the invincible fist sage and the others. Originally, the 4 of them had already planned to leave by airship. However, with a sweep of the tentacles, as soon as they arrived before the airships, the tentacles shattered the airships. Immediately, smoke and flames filled the air, and the 4 airships were completely reduced to ashes. No, the invincible fist sage's eyes were bloodshot. The little boy who had survived the calamity was still on his airship. But now, the little boy was also dead, killed by the broodmother. Disperse. We'll assemble at the Dead Sea of Abyss and inform Sage Kong. It's best if we wait for Sage Lin Feng. Only Sage Lin Feng can deal with the broodmother. The invincible fist sage roared heavenward. Although his eyes were bloodshot and his heart was filled with killing intent, he still maintained his rationality. The strongest combat power of humanity was the sages. If all the sages died, humanity would be finished. This was especially the case since the broodmother was so powerful. Those parasites were like locusts, and their numbers could even be infinite. No matter how many humans there were, they would not be enough before the parasitism of the insects. At that time, there would not even be a need to wait for the behemoth of Armageddon. That would be the day of humanity was destroyed. Hence, at this moment, the 4 sages made the choice decisively. They split up and fled in 4 directions. Even without the airships, the 4 sages were still rather fast. Swoosh, swoosh. The 4 sages fled in 4 directions. The broodmother was naturally rather furious. Hence, with a furious roar, it swept its tentacles in 4 directions. However, they had split up after all, and there was a slight delay. The 4 sages had all fled to some distance away. The broodmother was also rather intelligent. In its rage, it simply gathered all its tentacles and swept in one direction with all its might. The broodmother's tentacles focused all its strength, and its speed actually doubled instantly. Swoosh! The tentacle suddenly swept up the slowest sage. It was Sage Claws. This is bad. Sage Claws was shocked. He suddenly unleashed all the power of the divine kingdom. Unfortunately, as a tentacle curled around Sage Claws, the broodmother sent countless tentacles sweeping over densely, trapping Sage Claws. Sage Claws! The invincible fist sage and the other 2 sages also discovered the danger Sage Claws was in. They wanted to stop and rescue Sage Claws, but the broodmother was so powerful. Once they turned back, they would probably end up in a state as dangerous as Sage Claws'. All of you leave. Leave quickly. Return to the Dead Sea of Abyss and report the situation here. By the way, when you return, tell Sage Lin Feng that I'm not like Batai. I'm a sage of humanity. Sage Claws' voice was hoarse. His entire body was already densely enveloped by the broodmother's tentacles, and he was already being pulled back. The other 3 sages had expressions of incomparable grief and anger, but they could only watch helplessly as Sage Claws was pulled away by the broodmother, about to become the broodmother's delicious meal. Haha! You want me for more energy? Then I'll let you eat your fill at once. Just as Claws was about to be devoured by the broodmother, the astral power field on Claws' body suddenly became chaotic. At the same time, the sky seemed to have turned dark all of a sudden. Only the sages could clearly feel the boundless star power pouring down from the cosmos. Moreover, this star power was in a chaotic state, but it was vast and mighty, like a surging torrent. Boom! As the star power poured down, Sage Claws finally used his astral force field to attract all that star power. Then, the astral force field was instantly detonated. The impact of this explosion was simply too terrifying. In an instant, even the massive body of the broodmother was sent flying. The terrifying shockwave spread in all directions. The astral power plowed through a total of 10 kilometers, razing everything to the ground. Be it the tall buildings or the parasites, they were all reduced to ashes. This was the power of a sage. Once a sage relied on the astral force field to mobilize the star power in the cosmos, with the determination to die, they could invoke devastating destruction. Just this strike alone would kill any ordinary demon emperor, no matter how many there were. Even if they did not die, they would be severely injured. Unfortunately, the broodmother in front of him was clearly not an ordinary demon emperor. Even though it was also sent flying, it only suffered some superficial injuries, and its foundations remained unharmed. Sage Claws. The three sages who had long fled into the distance were also in deep shock, and could not calm for a long time. Sage Claws was dead, and he had died at the hands of a demon emperor. However, even in death, Sage Claws had shown the determination of a human sage in the most heroic manner. Sage Claws must not die in vain. Come, let's return to the Dead Sea of Abyss. The invincible fist sage gritted his teeth. This might be the most devastating situation humanity had ever encountered. Even a sage had no choice but to self-destruct and fall. However, the three sages knew that Sage Claws could not die in vain. They had to return to the Dead Sea of Abyss and converge with the other sages. Then, they could gather all their strength to deal with the broodmother. In the Sea Emperor Palace, Lin Feng had already used the tidal combat body. The 3-kilometer-long combat body was full of an imposing air. However, at this moment, Lin Feng's expression was a little conflicted. He had begun to absorb the huge life core fragment in the Sea Emperor Palace. More than 10 days had passed since then, and he was completely immersed in it. There were many memories of the Leviathan contained in this huge life core fragment, and they were very complete. It was mainly the process of growth from a time the Leviathan was weak to the 6th life transition, which was also the process of becoming a planetary lifeform. As the life core fragment was huge, so were the memories. Even absorbing a little of it was equivalent to receiving tens of thousands of years of memory. Moreover, Lin Feng was completely immersed in the process. Even his consciousness was beginning to fall into decadence, and even Lin Feng himself did not notice it. The memories of the Leviathan could indeed give Lin Feng a lot of insight, and even allow his mental power to break through to the 4th level of the mental guidance technique. However, at the same time, once Lin Feng was completely immersed in it and could not extricate himself, he would be assimilated by the memories of the Leviathan and would never wake up. Lin Feng was lost in it now, yet he did not know this himself. It was as if he was already a Leviathan, carefree in the waters and an absolute overlord. As its strength gradually increased, it began to go ashore and began to slaughter and devour. The memories this time were very detailed and complete. They were far from the life core fragment that Lin Feng had obtained in the 18 grottos of Dragonhead. The memories back then were intermittent and only existed as fragments. Hence, as those memories were fragmented themselves, Lin Feng was not as completely immersed in them back then as he was now. Now that Lin Feng had obtained such a complete memory, it was as if he had transformed into a Leviathan. He had inherited all the actions, thoughts, and so on of the Leviathan, following its instincts completely. Alas, he's actually lost in the memories of the Leviathan. Did the spear of destruction really choose him? In the darkness, a sigh echoed. It was the Sea Emperor. However, the Sea Emperor did not move. He knew that absorbing the life core was not that easy. The reason he agreed so readily was also to see if Lin Feng could really absorb the life core fragment. But from the looks of things now, it seemed like Lin Feng was no different from an ordinary lifeform after all. He was lost in it. Some of the sea beasts under the Sea Emperor were also lost in the memories of the Leviathan and could not extricate themselves. In the end, they were devoured by the Sea Emperor. As they were immersed in the memories of the Leviathan, even if they were forcefully awakened, they would still become the Leviathan. In a sense, if they were really assimilated by the memories of the Leviathan, it would be tantamount to the Leviathan being resurrected. However, the Sea Emperor still decided to give Lin Feng some time. It was not that he trusted Lin Feng, but that he trusted the Spear of Destruction. He believed that there was definitely more to the life form chosen by the Spear of Destruction. On the coast of the Dead Sea of Abyss, Sage Kong and the others were waiting quietly. It was apparent that the expressions of the 4 sages were very solemn and somewhat anxious. Swoosh! Suddenly, 3 airships appeared in the distance. The invincible sage has returned. A trace of joy appeared on Sage Yuani's face. They were finally back. Ever since they received the message from the invincible fist sage, the four sages felt as if days were passing by in an agonizingly slow manner. Indeed, 3 sages alighted from the airship. They were the 3 sages from the academic faction. They had gone to another city, mobilized 3 airships, and rushed back as quickly as possible. Invincible sage, is the message you sent true? When the invincible fist sage and the others returned to the shore of the Dead Sea of Abyss, Sage Kong could not help but ask immediately. Sage Kong, it's true. Moreover, the situation now is even more serious than before. The parasitic species have completely spread. They have appeared in not only Dragonlith City, but more than 10 cities of various scales. Humanity is experiencing an unprecedented calamity. The invincible fist sage's eyes were completely bloodshot. During this period of time, there was bad news almost every day. The parasites had spread in an overwhelming manner, and humans could put up almost no resistance. Even sages were not their match, let alone ordinary people. Sage Claus has also fallen. At the mention of Sage Claus, the 7 sages fell silent. Sage Claus' tragic fall truly showed how grim and cruel this incident was. If the parasitic species continued to wreak havoc, humanity would likely collapse completely in less than a year, in a few months. By the way, where's Sage Lin Feng? Only Sage Lin Feng can stop the broodmother now. The invincible fist sage looked around, but did not see Lin Feng. He had a bad feeling. Sage Lin Feng has yet to emerge. Half a month has already passed. According to our agreement with Sage Lin Feng back then, we can only wait for another half a month. Sage Kang's expression was solemn as he said in a low voice. But how many more people will be dead in half a month? The invincible fist sage was somewhat anxious. There's nothing we can do. Even if the 7 of us go, how can we stop the broodmother? Sage Lin Feng is our only hope. All we can do now is wait. Sage Kong made the final decision. He still held great authority and could make the decision on major matters such as this. Hence, the 7 sages waited quietly on the shore of the Dead Sea. Every day, countless messages would arrive, almost all of which were grievous news. The speed at which the parasitic species was spreading was growing more and more rapid. Humanity was truly at a life-or-death juncture. Time passed slowly. The 7 sages were unmoved, but as time slowly went by, their expressions also became very grim. It's been a month. Sage Kong opened his eyes and glanced at the still calm Dead Sea. His voice was a little hoarse, and even carried a trace of bitterness. It had been a month, and Lin Feng had not come ashore. There were 2 possible reasons to why Lin Feng had not come ashore. One was that Lin Feng had been delayed by something and could not come ashore in time. The other was the awful possibility that Lin Feng had encountered trouble at the bottom of the sea, and might even have fallen. However, regardless of the case, the period of a month was up. It was impossible for the sages to continue waiting. I hope Sage Lin Feng was delayed by something. He's our only hope. Leave a communicator for Sage Lin Feng, and record the matter of the parasitic species on it. We'll set off immediately to stop the parasitic species. Sage Kong was also very decisive. He did things without hesitation. Since a month had passed and Lin Feng had not come ashore, they had to leave. Countless humans needed them now. They might die if they went, but this was their responsibility. They were sages, the tutelary deities of humanity. When danger came, they had to shoulder it. Led by the invincible fist sage, the 7 sages left the Dead Sea of Abyss and resolutely returned to the human world. According to the latest news, the 5 major factions have already announced that they will do everything they can to stop the parasitic species. Research shows that the parasitic species can parasitize all living beings, plunder all the energy in their bodies to convert it into their own energy, and evolve at the fastest speed. Experts say that they are doing their best to research drugs to combat the parasitic ability of the parasitic species. The broodmother made a new move today and completely destroyed the Black Jade City. In only 3 hours, it devoured 3 million people in Black Jade City. Currently, only 3,600 people have escaped, The tranquility of humanity was completely gone, replaced by the various grievous information that appeared on the news every day. The parasite species had made a comeback. This time, all humans had experienced what the people of Dragonless City had felt back then. The terror of the parasite species was no longer distant and irrelevant, but a genuine threat, a threat to all humanity. Such grievous news came every day. This was simply much more frightening than the predator dire beasts back then. Although the predator dire beasts had also incurred damage to humans back then, they were far less calamitous than the parasitic species. Even sage claws had died in battle. The death of a sage was an especially heavy blow to humanity. After all, Claws was different from Bataille. Sage Claws was the first sage to die in battle against dire beasts. In particular, humanity had yet to find an effective way to resist the parasites. They lost cities and lands every day, and the parasites had gradually advanced into the heartland of humanity. In just half a month, the parasites had already caused at least 20 million deaths, and this number was still increasing. What was especially terrifying was that tens of millions more parasites had been born to the parasitic species. They were all powerful parasites born from parasitizing humans. Everyone was anticipating the appearance of the sages, because neither Divine Realm martial artists nor Metadivine Realm martial artists seemed to be effective. Latest news, the person in charge of the League of Guardians and the fiancée of Sage Linfeng, Miss Chu Chun, has led many members of the League of Guardians and more than 200,000 armed robots to join the battlefield at Maple Leaf City. Another news notification stunned everyone slightly. The League of Guardians? Only then did many people remember that there were no longer the 5 major factions, but the 6 major factions. However, they only remembered Sage Linfeng, and very few people remembered the League of Guardians. It was because the League of Guardians' presence was too weak. After all, the League of Guardians did not choose to develop in the inherent spheres of the 5 major factions. Instead, it went to the Outland and started out from scratch. How could anyone be aware? Even those who knew must be those martial artists who paid attention. Very few ordinary people knew about the League of Guardians. But now, only after the introduction on the news did they learn that the League of Guardians established by Sage Linfeng had a powerful force in the form of the armed robots. However, could these robots work? Could they stop the terrifying torrent of parasites? At this moment, not only were many people doubtful, Chu Chun was also uncertain. However, she still resolutely chose to lead the robot army and left the League of Guardians headquarters to rush to Maple Leaf City. Zhang Qiji accompanied Chu Chun and helped her to command the 200,000-strong robot army. As the name suggested, Maple Leaf City was the city of maple leaves. There were maple trees everywhere. In the fall, this would be the most beautiful place, and many people would come because of its reputation. Unfortunately, although it was also autumn now, no tourists dared to come anymore, for the parasitic species was already approaching Maple Leaf City. The current Maple Leaf City had already become the front line. I wonder how he is now. Chu Chun looked out of the city with some worry in her eyes. Chu Chun, don't worry. Sage Linfeng won't get into trouble so easily. Something must have delayed him. The one who spoke was the Invincible Fist Sage. Beside the Invincible Fist Sage were Sage Kong and the other 6 sages. Of the remaining 7 sages of humanity, apart from Linfeng, all had rushed to Maple Leaf City. It was just that this remained unreported. They were concealed in Maple Leaf City. Lord Invincible Fist Sage, Lord Sage Bingyu. Chu Chun hurriedly bowed to the Invincible Fist Sage and Sage Bingyu. These two were the deans of the Myriad Academy and the Polar Academy. Chu Chun was once a student of the Polar Academy, so she naturally did not dare to be disrespectful. Silly child, you shouldn't have come. Sage Bingyu was usually cold, but when she looked at Chu Chun, her gaze revealed gentleness. Perhaps because they were both women, Sage Bingyu was always more accommodating towards women. No, I'm the person in charge of the League of Guardians now. If Linfeng isn't here, I have to represent the League of Guardians. I can't shame his name. Chu Chun, however, was very determined. She was no longer just that ordinary student from the Polar Academy. She was Lin Feng's fiancée, the fiancée of a sage, and the temporary person in charge of the League of Guardians. Without Linfeng around, Chu Chun had to lead the League of Guardians to come forward. The elites of the 5 major factions as well as the 7 sages had already gathered in Maple City. This was practically the strongest lineup of humanity in the present. Maple Leaf City was where humans were determined to stop the parasites. There were no longer any ordinary people in the entire city. All of them had been evacuated, leaving only the elite forces of the 5 major factions. In a sense, this was practically the decisive battle. Chu Chun, you are doing great work. However, you likely know how dangerous this situation is. If the situation becomes critical, you have to retreat first, no matter what. Otherwise, I won't be able to answer to Sage Lin Feng, the invincible fist sage said slowly. Chu Chen's identity was special. He did not want the incident with Bataille to repeat itself. Lord Sage, don't worry. I understand the priorities. Chu Chun was not too insistent. She knew that once the situation turned south, it would be useless even if she stayed here. Incoming. Suddenly, Sage Kong said in a low voice. At the same time, everyone lifted their heads and looked into the distance. Rumble. On the distant horizon, a cloud of dust filled the air, accompanied by the faint sound of violent tremors. Countless ugly and hideous parasites swept over rapidly from afar like a deluge. Even the most determined person could not help but feel their scalps tingle. Those were not tens of thousands of parasites, but millions or tens of millions of them. They emitted a monstrous aura as they advanced continuously from afar. Chu Chen's face was a little pale. This was also the first time she had experienced such a scene. But she bit her lip hard and forced herself to calm her fear. Chu Chun, try the robot army from your League of Guardians. Sage Kong looked straight ahead at the parasitic species and said in a low voice, Target locked, attack. Chu Chun immediately gave the order. Immediately, countless robots jumped down from the city wall and charged towards the parasites in the distance like a surging tide. The military is ready to support the robots of the League of Guardians at any time. Maple Leaf City had long been installed with the military's most advanced giant cannons. This could be considered the decisive battle. Hence, the military had also invested heavily. Chu Chun clenched her fists. This was the first battle the League of Guardians was heading into, and it was such a critical battle. She must hold out no matter what. Boom. Finally, the armed robots of the League of Guardians clashed with the parasites. This was a collision of pure strength. In that instant, the robot army went all out. They were war machines from the third civilization. The robots that used energy weapons could easily kill even demons. Moreover, there were as many as 200,000 of them. Hence, the two torrents collided violently. The 200,000 armed robots went all out. Immediately, rows of parasites fell like scythed wheat. While these parasites had astonishing regenerative ability, the weapons of armed robots were also very formidable. With a single shot, countless parasites would be reduced to ashes and directly annihilated. This was the terrifying aspect of energy weapons. Even the regenerative ability of the parasites was not too effective before them. Of course, this only applied for those ordinary parasites. Armed robots were not very effective against those parasite demons at the level of demon generals. After all, it was very difficult to blast such powerful parasite demons into ashes at once. As long as they were not reduced to ashes, the parasites would be very difficult to kill. However, demon generals were not ubiquitous among the parasites. Most of them were just very ordinary parasites. The parasites that charged over first were all cannon fodder. In just a minute, more than 500,000 of the parasites had been killed. However, a mere 500,000 was nothing to the parasites. The parasites did not number in the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, but in the millions or tens of millions. As long as the broodmother existed, it could produce parasites continuously. Forget about tens of millions, even hundreds of millions or billions would be nothing. The armed robots were indeed powerful, but there were too few of them. Moreover, as the demon generals of the parasitic species attacked, the armed robots began struggling to hold out. In just over 10 minutes, the number of armed robots decreased bit by bit. Finally, they were completely drowned out by the torrent of parasites, disappearing without a trace. the 200,000 armed robots were completely annihilated. Chu Chen's face was a little pale. These were 200,000 armed robots. Even against Metadivine Realm martial artists, the robots could surround and kill them. Moreover, in a head-on battle, the armed robots also had the upper hand. The armed robots were already very powerful. Unfortunately, facing the numerical advantage of the parasites, even 200,000 robots could not stop the torrent of parasites. Chu Chen, your League of Guardians has made a contribution. The armed robots are very strong. That round of head-on collision just now destroyed at least 1 million parasites. Now it's our turn. Sage Kong affirmed the armed robots of the League of Guardians. After all, robots could be manufactured in batches. If they were lost, so be it. If those were humans, that would be 200,000 lives. Chu Chun bit her lip and nodded to herself. Due to time constraints, she had only brought 200,000 armed robots with her. In reality, after the outbreak of the parasitic species, she had used her authority to open the robot production line of the League of Guardians to produce armed robots continuously. Apart from the 200,000 robots she brought, another 200,000 robots had stayed behind to defend the League of Guardians. After all, the League of Guardians was the foundation. However, now that she saw the outstanding performance of these armed robots, she calmed down. At the very least, armed robots were effective. Once the production line was opened at full force, with the reserves in the underground base of the League of Guardians, creating millions of armed robots would be a piece of cake. But what was the use of millions of armed robots? The torrent of parasites in front of them might be threatening, but how could these ordinary parasites be the greatest threat? The greatest threat was the broodmother. Without the broodmother, the sages could easily kill these parasites with their divine kingdoms. Even if there were tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of them, what use would it be? It would just take a little more time. However, with the broodmother around, it would be the greatest threat, because the broodmother was even more terrifying than sages. Blast with the giant cannons. As Sage Kong gave the order, the giant cannons of Maple Leaf City fired in a frenzy. These giant cannons actually referenced the energy weapons of the League of Guardians and could already pose a lethal threat to ordinary demons. Thousands of giant cannons fired at the same time, rumbling continuously like thunder in the sky. Swaths of parasites fell one after another, but a large amount of parasites still charged up to the walls of the Maple City. At this moment, the 7 sages were already prepared. Divine Kingdom of Fire. The invincible Fist Sage was the first to make a move. His divine kingdom instantly enveloped an area of a few kilometers outside Maple City. Countless parasites charged in frantically, but the invincible Fist Sage did not even have to attack. The flames in his divine kingdom had already burned the parasites to ashes. These parasites constantly charged into the divine kingdom wave after wave like moths to a flame, but it was in vain. As long as the invincible Fist Sage blocked the way to Maple Leaf City, no parasite could charge into Maple Leaf City. It was a true one-man army holding the pass against 10,000 enemies. This was a sage. At the same time, other than Sage Kong, Sage Bingyu, Sage Cass, and the others all used their divine kingdoms, forming an unbreakable line of defense outside Maple City. Those parasites plunged into the divine kingdom, but in the divine kingdom, be it ordinary parasites, demon generals, or even demon kings, they were all useless. As long as they charged into the divine kingdom, they would be completely annihilated. Moreover, as astral force fields, the divine kingdoms were almost infinite. They would not consume much for the sages. Even if they used the divine kingdom for 8 or 10 months, it would not affect sages at all. Numbers were meaningless to sages. However, the sages' true opponents had never been these ordinary parasites. No matter how many of these parasites there were, in the eyes of the sages, they were just cannon fodder. Their true opponent was the broodmother. Boom! As the ground shook, an incomparably huge body appeared on the distant horizon, approaching step by step. The parasites seemed to have received the order to stop attacking the divine kingdoms of the sages like moths to a flame. Instead, they retreated and glared menacingly as they remained motionless. Boom! 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 As the broodmother gradually approached, Many people could not help but hold their breaths when they saw the broodmother for the first time. They almost suffocated. That was the broodmother. Its body was 5 kilometers long, and it looked like a mountain of flesh. Its entire body emitted an unsettling and terrifying aura. Everyone knew that the true battle had just begun. The broodmother was here. Attack with full force, Sage Kong shouted. The 7 sages all released their divine kingdoms and enveloped the broodmother. Boom! 7 types of divine kingdoms and 7 astral force fields all pressed down on the broodmother. Even the massive body of the broodmother could not help but be pressed down. It was as if the world was collapsing. Even the ground fractured, forming cracks like spiderwebs. Seeing this scene, everyone in Maple Leaf City was shocked by the power of the sages. This was a sage. There had long been a legend among humans that sages were invincible. Now, they had actually seen this scene with their own eyes, and it was 7 sages attacking at the same time. How shocking was this? However, the broodmother was clearly stronger. Under the simultaneous attacks of the 7 sages, it was only barely suppressed, and its massive body was not injured at all. Be it flames or storms in the divine kingdom, neither seemed to be able to cause any damage to the broodmother. Buzz. Suddenly, the broodmother's entire body shook. Immediately after, its body began to slowly stand up. On the other hand, the expressions of the 7 sages changed drastically. What did they sense? The 7 types of divine kingdom were actually ripped apart by the broodmother one after another. These were 7 astral force fields which were already all the power of sages. Even if they could not overpower the broodmother, they should be able to barely suppress it, right? Unfortunately, Sage Kong had underestimated the broodmother's strength. The 7 sages had also overestimated their strength. Boom! The broodmother pushed forward, and the 7 divine kingdoms instantly collapsed. Immediately, mountains collapsed and the earth cracked. It was as if the sky had collapsed all of a sudden. It was truly earth-shattering. How powerful was the divine kingdom of the 7 sages? Yet even they could not suppress the broodmother. The broodmother broke free from the pressure on its body, and its huge body crushed down towards the 7 sages. Boom! The ground shook. All the sages felt the threat of death. If they were crushed by broodmother or bumped into it, they would really die. No matter how abundant their astral power was, it was useless against such terrifying power. Retreat! Retreat! Use Plan B and engage the broodmother. We must hold back the broodmother no matter what, Sage Kong immediately shouted. The 7 sages had formulated many plans to stop the parasitic species in Maple Leaf City this time. The first was for the 7 sages to join forces to suppress the broodmother. If it didn't work, they would execute Plan B, which was to roam around the broodmother, constantly impede it, and suppress and kill those ordinary parasites. This might be the simplest and crudest method, and there was no efficiency to speak of. However, this was a last resort. Otherwise, with the massive number of parasites, it would not be too difficult for them to annihilate humanity. The 7 sages switched their method and roamed around the broodmother continuously. Although their divine kingdoms had been torn apart, they still had infinite astral power. Hence, with a casual strike of astral power from them, dozens or hundreds of parasites would be reduced to mush. Every time the broodmother tried to do anything, sages would come to interfere. For a moment, they actually stopped the attacks of those parasites. Good! Many people in Maple Leaf City were very excited. Their only hope was the sages. Now that they saw that the sages could hold off the broodmother and resist the attacks of the parasitic species, they could finally heave a sigh of relief. However, the broodmother was exceptionally furious. Swoosh! Many tentacles suddenly lashed out from the broodmother's body. The tentacles swept towards the sages like lightning. Moreover, the broodmother was very shrewd. It only focused its power in 2 or 3 directions. The speed of the tentacles was incredible. Even if the sages sensed them, it would be very difficult for them to dodge. Sage Bingyu and Sage Cass were both swept up by the tentacles. Sage Bingyu, Sage Cass. Seeing that the 2 sages were in danger, all the sages were shocked and furious. They charged towards the broodmother in a frenzy. Lin Feng had transformed into the Leviathan. Or rather, he was completely immersed in the memories of the Leviathan and had already become a part of it. Faced with the vast memories of the Leviathan, Lin Feng's mere 20-odd years of memories were insignificant. In the Leviathan's memories, it devoured everything along the way. Finally, it encountered some powerful life forms. These life forms established kingdoms and civilizations. They were filled with intelligence and understood methods of cultivation. Although they were born weak, they could become stronger step by step through cultivation. However, no matter how strong these life forms were, the outcome was already determined when facing the Leviathan. As the Leviathan destroyed the homes of those weak life forms, devoured all those weak life forms, and disintegrated the resistance of those weak life forms, the entire civilization was destroyed. Its exquisite architecture, vast history, and prosperous culture, all of them were reduced to the dust of time under the destruction of the Leviathan. Exposed skeletons were strewn about in the wilderness. It was a ghastly sight. Deep down, however, traces of emotions seemed to ripple through the originally apathetic and unwitting Leviathan. I am not the Leviathan. I do not need to destroy. Slowly, a glimmer of light expanded in the Leviathan's memory. Immediately after, Lin Feng's consciousness gradually awakened. Swoosh! When Lin Feng opened his eyes, he felt that the entire world had changed. The huge mass of memories in his mind also shocked him. He had been just a little, away from being assimilated by the memories of the Leviathan and turning completely into the Leviathan. This life core fragment was really terrifying. No wonder the Sea Emperor did not hesitate to give the life core for Lin Feng's use. It was not that the Sea Emperor was really so magnanimous. It was probably also a test from the Sea Emperor. Once Lin Feng was really completely lost in the Leviathan's memories, over time, his combat body would slowly collapse, and he would finally die completely. There is great terror in life or death situations, but also great opportunity. Although Lin Feng felt a lingering fear, he had gained a lot. At this moment, by almost natural development, his mental power broke through to the 4th level of the mental guidance technique in an instant. There were no obstructions at all. It was an entirely natural outcome that occurred as the right conditions were fulfilled. After all, in the memories of the Leviathan, Lin Feng had been a Leviathan with billions of years of memories. In fact, if Lin Feng cultivated his mental power properly, it was not impossible for him to break through to the 5th level. This was really a huge gain. Moreover, the greater gain was regarding life transitions. Although the Leviathan was acting entirely on instinct from the memories of the Leviathan, Lin Feng could truly experience how it had slowly undergone 1 life transition, 2 life transitions, 3 life transitions, 4 life transitions, and finally 5 life transitions. Lin Feng felt as if he had experienced the entire process himself. Hence, Lin Feng had comprehension from it. He could even feel that every cell in his combat body was cheering and yearning. The 4th life transition was imminent. Rumble. Every cell in Lin Feng's tidal combat body was cheering, eager, and yearning. This was the first time Lin Feng had felt such a natural life transition. This meant that his accumulation was truly abundant. In the past, be it the 1st life transition, the 2nd life transition, or the 3rd life transition, Lin Feng had always initiated the life transition. Furthermore, his 1st life transition only succeeded due to potential compelled by a life or death situation. Actually, that was not a good thing. It would gradually exhaust one's potential. The most ideal thing was to undergo life transition naturally without steering it. For example, the Leviathan accumulated step by step through instinct. Through billions of years of continuous accumulation and devouring, every life transition was a natural success. Only by doing this would its potential be greater in the future. This was also why the Leviathan could undergo 6 life transitions in its ignorance, and eventually become a planetary life form. Lin Feng's cells began to divide. His 3-kilometer combat body expanded wildly, and the arrangement of his combat body was completely disrupted. At this moment, Lin Feng naturally visualized the 4th level of the combat body guidance technique, regarding the arrangement of cells during the 4th life transition of the tidal combat body. His mental power was also slowly guiding the arrangement of the combat body. 3 kilometers, 4 kilometers, 5 kilometers. The speed at which Lin Feng's combat body expanded was incredible. Moreover, such a huge commotion naturally shook the entire Sea Emperor Palace. He actually woke up and started the fourth life transition. The Sea Emperor was very surprised. He had clearly seen how Lin Feng lost in the Leviathan's memories. He thought that Lin Feng might never wake up again in this life. However, not only had Lin Feng awakened, he had also undergone the fourth life transition. Just the idea of it was astonishing. However, considering that Lin Feng had been chosen by the Spear of Destruction, the Sea Emperor was not that surprised. The being chosen by destiny, you have infinite potential. Unfortunately, you still can't escape the cycle. The Sea Emperor heaved a long sigh. He had actually long lost hope. The behemoth of Armageddon destroyed the world again and again, and the being chosen by the Spear of Destruction would always appear to stop the behemoth of Armageddon. It happened time after time in an unending cycle that repeats itself. It was like a fixed program. When the time came, the program would activate, and things would end in the conclusion established by the program. Lin Feng might indeed be the person chosen by the Spear of Destruction, and might indeed be able to stop the behemoth of Armageddon. However, that was all. The behemoth of Armageddon would still destroy human civilization, and Lin Feng would die. However, before he died, he would also severely injure the behemoth of Armageddon and make it enter a slumber again. The Sea Emperor had already witnessed how such a script played out 8 times. The Sea Emperor was already numb. He could not change the grand scheme, and he could not escape this planet. In that case, he naturally neither supported nor obstructed Lin Feng. Lin Feng's combat body was still expanding, but the Sea Emperor no longer paid attention to it. This time, he was really slumbering. He only instructed that Lin Feng could leave the Sea Emperor Palace at any time. 6 kilometers, 7 kilometers, 8 kilometers. The speed at which Lin Feng's combat body expanded was simply too fast. Even the life core fragment he had obtained in the 18 grottos of Dragonhead probably could not support the expansion of Lin Feng's massive combat body. However, Lin Feng's life core fragment was more than 10 times that of the life core fragment in the 18 grottos of Dragonhead. Such a massive life core fragment was accumulated by the Leviathan over billions of years. The amount of energy in it far exceeded Lin Feng's imagination. Hence, Lin Feng could strengthen the tidal combat body to his heart's content. In the blink of an eye, the tidal combat body had already expanded to more than 10 kilometers. But it was not over. It was still expanding rapidly. Its massive body allowed Lin Feng to look down on the entire Sea Emperor Palace. Only by looking down did he realize how powerful the Sea Emperor Palace was. The accumulation of the Sea Emperor over billions of years was indeed extraordinary. The originally huge life core fragment was actually shrinking rapidly as Lin Feng's combat body continued to expand. In the blink of an eye, it had shrunken considerably. Moreover, even with the naked eye, one could see the life core shrinking. The 2 Sea Beast Emperors in the Sea Emperor Palace were also paying attention to Lin Feng and the life core fragment. Their hearts ached as they watched the life core fragment shrink bit by bit. This was the accumulation of billions of years in the Sea Emperor Palace, the supreme treasure of the Sea Emperor Palace. Now, it had been absorbed by a mere human like Lin Feng. However, the Sea Emperor had once ordered that no one was allowed to disturb Lin Feng's life transition. Hence, despite their discontent, they did not disturb Lin Feng. Lin Feng also nodded to himself. He naturally saw all of this, and considered it a favor he owed the Sea Emperor. 10 kilometers, 15 kilometers, 20 kilometers, 25 kilometers. Lin Feng's tidal combat body had already expanded to the point that Lin Feng felt a little uncomfortable. It was too powerful. He had never felt so powerful before. Fortunately, he was at the bottom of the sea. Otherwise, his combat body, which was dozens of kilometers in size, would probably have long reached the atmosphere. When Lin Feng's tidal combat body expanded to 30 kilometers, it gradually began to stop expanding as well, finally stopping at 31 kilometers. A 31-kilometer combat body was several times stronger than the Sea Emperor's combat body. Even without using the Spear of Destruction, Lin Feng could easily destroy the Sea Emperor Palace and defeat the Sea Emperor. However, the huge life core fragment had now shrunken to the size of a millstone. It was really insignificant. The Sea Emperor Palace could be considered to have invested heavily this time. Without this huge life core fragment, Lin Feng could forget about successfully undergoing a life transition, let alone condensing such a huge combat body. It had to be known that without sufficient energy, once the combat body was finalized, even if it could continue to grow in the future, its growth would be limited. This was also why Longbetham placed so much emphasis on energy. Lin Feng, that was really dangerous. You were lost in the memory fragments of the Leviathan. I kept calling to you, but it was useless. Longbetham's voice sounded in Lin Feng's mind. There was still some anxiety and lingering fear in Longbetham's tone. Once Lin Feng was lost in the Leviathan's memories, the consequences would be unthinkable. Lin Feng had really taken too much risk this time. Longbetham, how can there be gains without effort? Even though I was almost assimilated this time, I finally succeeded. With 4 life transitions, I can accept your master's true legacy, right? Lin Feng naturally did not forget that he had yet to obtain the true legacy. Only after 4 life transitions could one obtain Bamon's legacy. Of course you can obtain the legacy. Master's legacy will definitely be astounding. It definitely will not disappoint you. All right, let's go now. Lin Feng quickly put away the 31-kilometer tidal combat body and prepared to bid farewell to the Sea Emperor. Lin Feng retracted his body. The 2 sea beasts had already arrived. Looking at the little life core fragment left, their expressions were very dark. Lin Feng was also a little embarrassed, but he still smiled and said, I'm preparing to leave. Please take me to bid farewell to His Majesty the Sea Emperor. The 2 sea beasts said coldly, There's no need. His Majesty the Sea Emperor is already asleep. Before he fell asleep, he instructed us that you can leave at any time you wish. That's... Lin Feng took a deep breath, then said loudly to the Sea Emperor Palace, Lin Feng will remember your Majesty's kindness. I will repay you in the future. With that, he left the Sea Emperor Palace. Longbetham, how long has it been since I entered the bottom of the sea? 1 month and 9 days. Lin Feng was shocked. The duration he had agreed on with the sages had already been exceeded by 9 days. The sages must be very worried as well. However, he was in the Sea Emperor Palace, absorbing the life core fragment and almost being assimilated by the Leviathan's memories. There was no way for him to wake up in advance. Hence, Lin Feng sped up. Swoosh! Lin Feng flew out of the Dead Sea of Abyss. He looked towards the shore, but did not find any sages. What's going on? Lin Feng's expression gradually became solemn. He knew that even if he did not return for a month, the sages would not all leave. At least some of them would have stayed and waited for him. Why was there not a single sage now? However, with a sweep of his mental power, Lin Feng discovered a communicator on the shore. Swoosh! Lin Feng flew over and picked up the communicator. There was also a message on the communicator. Lin Feng read it carefully, but his gaze became colder and colder. Maple Leaf City. Lin Feng never expected that humanity would encounter such a major matter in just over a month after he left. According to the message, humanity was even in danger of being annihilated. This was no behemoth of Armageddon. How could mere parasites incur such heavy losses to humanity? Boom! Lin Feng flew swiftly into the sky. According to the message on his communicator, an airship had been left for him not far away. He had to rush to Maple Leaf City as soon as possible. Slash! Sage Kong and the Invincible Fist Sage both flew towards the Broodmother in a frenzy. They wanted to stop the Broodmother. Countless tentacles wrapped around Sage Bingyu and Sage Cass. The Invincible Fist Sage continued to unleash astral martial techniques like a madman, slashing at the Broodmother's tentacles. Thump! Finally, the tentacles on Sage Bingyu's body were severed by the Invincible Fist Sage. The Broodmother roared angrily, and then, thousands of tentacles lashed in all directions wildly. The sages could only keep retreating, while Sage Cass was densely surrounded by tentacles. His body was covered in tentacles as he was sent flying rapidly towards the broodmother's maw. This day would come sooner or later. Sage Cass, on the other hand, appeared very calm. His gaze swept across the invincible Fist Sage and Sage Bingyu, and infinite longing appeared in his eyes. He was a dignified sage of high status, the dean of the Sanctuary Academy. How could he want to die? He also had the longing for life, but at this moment he was helpless. As a sage, he had to step forward courageously. "Goodbye, everyone." A smile appeared on Sage Cass's lips. Then, a large amount of star power suddenly poured down from the sky, as if the entire sky had suddenly gone dark. No, no. The invincible Fist Sage and Sage Bingyu were the most agitated. As sages from the academic faction, the three sages had a good relationship. They had supported each other to this point. But now, Sage Cass was going to die, and he was going to die in front of them. Yet there was nothing they could do. For a moment, even the usually cold Sage Bingyu could not help but weep. Boom! As a large amount of star power poured down, Sage Cass detonated the astral force field. Immediately, a terrifying shockwave spread in all directions. The sages could still resist, but the surrounding parasites fell in droves, reduced to ashes by the terrifying shockwave. The broodmother was struck by the self-destruct astral force field of a sage again. It appeared very furious. Even though it was also in a very sorry state, a sage's self-destruct astral force field could not cause fatal damage to the broodmother. "Kill!" the invincible Fist Sage shouted. He was filled with monstrous killing intent now, but he was very calm, even terrifyingly so. All they could do was stall for time and keep stalling. Hence, the remaining 6 sages were all very calm. They did not take the initiative to provoke the broodmother, but took care to deal with the ordinary parasites, preventing them from approaching Maple Leaf City any further. Time passed slowly. In the blink of an eye, a few hours had passed. The broodmother was abnormally furious. It tried to trap and kill a sage madly, but every sage became very prudent. Once someone was entangled by the tentacles, another sage would quickly come to their rescue. Even though there was also danger, the 6 sages were all unharmed. The broodmother went berserk. It suddenly abandoned the 6 sages and advanced straight towards Maple Leaf City. Rumble. The huge cannons on Maple Leaf City bombarded the broodmother wildly, but it was useless. They could not injure the broodmother at all. Moreover, the broodmother was still approaching step by step. As for the city walls, forget about the broodmother. They could not even resist ordinary parasites. Retreat! Retreat now! Xianxia grabbed Chu-chan and retreated in a frenzy, ignoring what Chu-chan was thinking. The massive body of the broodmother paid no heed to what was ahead at all. It just crushed everything directly. Immediately, the city wall collapsed. The massive body of the broodmother crushed countless martial artists in Maple Leaf City. As long as it wreaked havoc in Maple Leaf City, it would deal a huge blow to humanity. Damn it! The 6 sages' faces were ashen. They could kill those ordinary parasites at will, but those ordinary parasites were only cannon fodder. Even if all of them died, the broodmother could quickly produce more. As for humans, if they allowed the broodmother to keep wreaking havoc like this, humanity would suffer heavy losses. Humanity could not afford a war of attrition either. Stop the broodmother! Sage Kong gritted his teeth. They had no choice but to stop the broodmother with all their might. Hence, the 6 sages went forward to harass the broodmother again, trying to stop it. However, this time, the broodmother seemed determined to turn the Maple Leaf City into dust. Its massive body crushed everything in its path, and innumerable tall buildings collapsed. Countless martial artists were crying and running for their lives. But what was the use? No one could escape from the broodmother that was 5 kilometers long. Chu-chun and Xianxia were no exception. The 2 of them could only watch helplessly as the broodmother approached. It did not even notice them. "Sister-in-law, you can't die. If you die, I won't be able to answer to brother phone." Xianxia gritted his teeth and turned around to run. He held his energy weapon and fired wildly at the broodmother. Boom! The broodmother looked at the tiny insect under it. If anyone dared to resist, its massive body would crush them directly. There was fear and panic on Zhang Qiji's face, but at this moment, he could only smile wanly. "Tell Brother Feng that he must avenge me. Haha." Zhang Qiji laughed maniacally. "Qiji." Chu Chun bit her lip. She felt so helpless at this moment. Swoosh. Suddenly, an airship appeared in the distant sky. It arrived at Maple Leaf City in the blink of an eye. "Brood Mother, die." A familiar voice sounded in the sky. At the same time, a figure flew down from the airship. Its body grew in the air, and in the blink of an eye, it had transformed into a mountain-like giant. The giant took a huge step forward. Like a dark cloud, it descended from the sky. It was a dark mass that carried infinite power as it stomped towards the broodmother. Boom! This step landed directly on the broodmother. The broodmother's massive body sank straight into the ground, creating a huge pit. "That's Sage Lin Feng. It's Sage Lin Feng. Sage Lin Feng has returned." Seeing this giant foot, all 6 remaining sages were thrilled. There were only 6 sages left, but they still had determination in their hearts. They still had hope because of Lin Feng. They believed that Lin Feng was not dead, and was only delayed by something. As expected, Sage Lin Feng had appeared, and he was so domineering the moment he appeared. He stomped the insufferably arrogant parasites into the ground with a single step. How satisfying! Brother Feng. Zhang Qiji was also overjoyed. He had escaped death by a hair's breadth. He looked up at Lin Feng's massive body. Fortunately, Lin Feng had arrived in time. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. "Qiji, take Chen Chen and leave this place." Lin Feng naturally saw Zhang Qiji and Chu Chen. He also had some lingering fear. If he had come any later, the outcome would have been unthinkable. Zhang Qiji also knew that now was not the time to reminisce. He immediately left with Chu Chun. Lin Feng looked at the broodmother at his feet, and a trace of killing intent flashed across his eyes. Boom! The broodmother's huge body struggled to get out. It was in a towering rage. No one had ever put it in such a sorry state. It was almost invincible the entire way. No one or power could stop it. Even the 2 sages who had self-destructed previously could not stop it. But now it was in such a miserable state. This was the first time it had been stepped on. It was very furious, and its huge body emitted a suffocating pressure. "Brood Mother? You're just a tiny worm." Lin Feng's gaze was cold. He had already sensed that even the broodmother should definitely be severely injured by his stomp. However, the reality was that the broodmother was still intact. It seemed like the broodmother also had the terrifying regenerative ability of those screwworms. Swoosh! The broodmother's countless tentacles swept towards Lin Feng, but Lin Feng reached out and grabbed. Countless tentacles wrapped around his arm. Humph! Lin Feng snorted coldly. At the same time, his body expanded again. Just now, he had only used a combat body of 3 kilometers. In terms of strength, he was indeed a little inferior to the broodmother. But now, he had undergone for life transitions. 3 kilometers, 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers. In the blink of an eye, Lin Feng had already expanded to 15 kilometers. Just the aura emitted by this massive body of 15 kilometers was unbearable to the sages. Sage Lin Feng has become even stronger. Many sages were very surprised. Previously, Lin Feng's body was only 3 kilometers long, but now it was actually 15 kilometers long. It had increased by 5 times. In reality, they did not know that Lin Feng's combat body had already reached 31 kilometers. However, Lin Feng did not need to use his full strength to deal with a mere broodmother. The aura emitted by the 15-kilometer tidal combat body terrified even the broodmother. Down you go! Like a deity, Lin Feng stomped down hard on the broodmother again. The broodmother raised countless tentacles in an attempt to resist. However, Lin Feng gave a forceful tug, and countless tentacles broke instantly, causing the broodmother immense pain. As the gigantic foot landed, the broodmother was stomped into the ground again. However, Lin Feng did not let the broodmother off easily this time. He stepped hard on the broodmother's body, then grabbed a part of the broodmother's body with all his might and tore it apart. There was a ripping noise. The broodmother cried out in pain. Immediately, a portion of the flesh on the broodmother's body was forcefully torn off by Lin Feng. Its miserable cries rang out incessantly. However, Lin Feng was unmoved. He carefully sensed the flesh and blood of the broodmother. Yes, there's the aura of a life core. Lin Feng's heart skipped a beat. There were actually fragments of a life core in the flesh of this broodmother. This meant that the broodmother had very likely devoured a life core fragment before. Otherwise, it would be impossible for it to grow such a huge body. Its 5-kilometer-long body was far larger than Dongfang Shang's back then. This meant that the life core fragment the broodmother had devoured was definitely extraordinary. The life core fragments are scattered everywhere now and devoured by dire beasts? Lin Feng frowned. He had always felt that something was a little strange. Why had the dire beasts become stronger and stronger recently? Many demon emperors previously unseen had appeared, and they had all become stronger due to life core fragments. If the Sea Emperor can guard humanity, we won't have to fear these dire beasts. Lin Feng thought of the Sea Emperor. He had also undergone for life transitions, and his body exceeded 10 kilometers in size. Even the broodmother was far inferior to the Sea Emperor. If the Sea Emperor were around, humanity would be impregnable. Lin Feng would not have to worry at all. Unfortunately, after experiencing 8 civilizations, the Sea Emperor had completely given up on leaving the Dead Sea of Abyss. Humans ultimately had to rely on themselves. The broodmother under his feet was still struggling violently. Lin Feng could only suppress it for the time being. Hence, the broodmother was still trying to break free from Lin Feng's suppression. Humph! Do you think I can't kill you? A trace of coldness flashed across Lin Feng's eyes. Then, the spear of destruction appeared in his hand, constantly emitting a terrifying annihilative aura. Lin Feng aimed the spear of destruction at the broodmother. The intelligence of this broodmother was no different from that of humans. In particular, with such a massive body, apart from Lin Feng and the Sea Emperor, almost no one was a match for the broodmother. It could naturally sense the terrifying annihilative aura contained in the spear of destruction. It knew very well that once the spear of destruction pierced its body, it might really die. Hence, the broodmother did not dare to act rashly anymore. It only kept growling, its eyes filled with ferocity. Tell me, did you obtain a scarlet crystal and devour it? Lin Feng used his mental power to ask the broodmother directly. He believed that if the broodmother could grow to this extent, it would definitely be able to make some simple use of mental power. As expected, a subtle mental fluctuation was transmitted to Lin Feng's mind. Human. Let me go and I'll tell you about the scarlet crystal. The broodmother was actually bargaining. Looks like you have the wrong idea about your current situation. Lin Feng sneered, then stabbed hard with the spear of destruction in his hand. Swish. The spear of destruction pierced into the broodmother body. Immediately, annihilative power was unleashed, destroying the broodmother body in an unbridled manner. The broodmother cried out in agony. Its body was being annihilated at a visible speed, turned into ashes. As for its regenerative ability, it was completely useless before the annihilative power. At this moment, the broodmother truly sensed the threat of death. It no longer doubted that the spear in the hand of the human in front of it could really kill it. I'll tell you whatever you want to ask. The broodmother was also afraid. Faced with the threat of death, it had no choice but to comply. Have you ever obtained this kind of scarlet crystal? Lin Feng took a small life core fragment directly. He had left this behind on purpose. I've never seen it before. The broodmother shook its head and said firmly. Is that so? Lin Feng sneered. The spear of destruction in his hand stabbed into the broodmother's body again. The annihilative power erupted, and the cells in the broodmother's body were quickly annihilated. Its massive body was being reduced to ashes at a visible speed. The broodmother was extremely terrified. It said loudly in a hurry, I know this kind of crystal. I was once just an ordinary screwworm, But it was precisely because I found this scarlet crystal and slowly absorbed it that I underwent metamorphosis again and again, becoming like this. Moreover, I learned how to devour from the scarlet crystal, and devoured to increase my strength. Originally, I wanted to use these small insects, and have them all return to my body after devouring continuously. I would devour them all so that my body can undergo metamorphosis again. However, after encountering you, my plan failed. Hearing the broodmother's answer, Lin Feng's heart skipped a beat. This broodmother must have been affected by the memories of the Leviathan in the life core fragment. Although it was not assimilated by the memories of the Leviathan, it was probably more or less affected by it. It even thought of devouring other life forms to undergo metamorphosis. Actually, this was a misconception. Leviathans were special life forms. Leviathans could increase their strength by devouring other life forms, but other life forms like the broodmother could not necessarily do so. The life core fragment had led to the metamorphoses of the broodmother. At the same time, it had created a demonic creature out of nowhere. This was the danger of the life core fragment. If Lin Feng had also been assimilated by the memories of the Leviathan back in the Sea Emperor Palace, either his body would slowly collapse, or he would think that he was the Leviathan after waking up, and continue to act according to the Leviathan's memories and devour continuously. At that time, Lin Feng would also become the greatest threat to humanity. The life core fragment could push a weak life form to become a powerful life form, allowing weak life forms to obtain great power. However, at the same time, it might also lead this life form to complete ruination. Although the broodmother in front of him seemed powerful, this was actually its limit. It had transformed to its current state through the life core fragment, and had actually reached its limit now. In fact, no matter how much it devoured, it could no longer increase its strength. On the contrary, it would transform into something similar to the behemoth of Armageddon, and think only of constantly devouring and destroying. Suddenly, Lin Feng thought of a possibility. Could the behemoth of Armageddon have also devoured the life core fragment, causing destruction to be its only thought? From there, it could sublimate in destruction and metamorphose into a planetary life form? This was not impossible. On the contrary, it was entirely possible. The broodmother on the ground was still struggling constantly. A trace of coldness flashed across Lin Feng's eyes. The terrifying parasitic species never actually existed in this world. They only existed because this tiny worm had accidentally obtained numerous life core fragments back then, and slowly transformed into the broodmother. This was how a terrifying parasitic species was born. These parasites were like locusts, constantly devouring and destroying. They were even more terrifying than predators. Do you still have any scarlet crystal left? No. Not long ago, I completely devoured that huge scarlet crystal. The broodmother replied honestly. What a pity. Lin Feng looked at the densely packed parasites around him. Without any hesitation, he stabbed down with the spear of destruction in his hand. Boom! The annihilative power in the spear of destruction erupted completely like a surging torrent. The broodmother's entire body struggled violently as it screamed wildly. However, its body was firmly stepped on by Lin Feng, and it could not move at all. Hence, in a very short period of time, the broodmother's body began to disintegrate rapidly at a visible speed, turning into ashes and disappearing into the air. Its 5-kilometer body could not even withstand the annihilative power of the spear of destruction for 3 minutes before all of it was reduced to ashes. The broodmother that had almost destroyed human civilization dissipated, just like that. As the broodmother dissipated, everyone was surprised to discover that those tens of thousands of parasites had also been reduced to ashes. These parasites were originally bred by the broodmother through special means. It could not even be called breeding, and they were originally part of the broodmother's body. With the death of the broodmother, these parasites naturally could not survive without their parent body. Tens of thousands of parasites died one after another. The massive amount of parasite corpses on the ground was a shocking sight. Dead. The parasitic species is dead. We won, we won. It's a pity that Sage Claws and Sage Cass can't see this. The parasitic species was completely annihilated, and even the broodmother died to Lin Feng's spear of destruction. The crisis for humanity had been resolved this time. However, this battle was a heavy loss for humanity, and one that must always be remembered. Sage Claus, Sage Cass. The sacrifice of two sages in this battle had become the most painful memory of humanity. It's all over. Sage Kong heaved a sigh of relief. He looked at the figure in the distance with a complicated expression. This time, Lin Feng had saved humanity and their remaining sages again. Back then, he had almost disappointed Lin Feng for the sake of the greater good. Fortunately, all of this was over. Sage Lin Feng, you came back at the right time. If you hadn't returned, once Maple Leaf City falls, the elites of the 6 major factions would probably all be lost. There's no knowing how many years it would take for recovery. Sage Kong and Sage Yuani came to Lin Feng's side. Lin Feng, on the other hand, did not appear that happy. He shook his head and said, "Do you know? The broodmother was actually just a tiny worm. By chance, it devoured the scarlet crystal and ended up becoming the broodmother. Although the behemoth of Armageddon has yet to awaken, we humans are just too weak." Lin Feng spoke with feeling. Just by devouring the life core fragment, a mere broodmother could crush all the sages of humanity, and even have the power to destroy the entire human civilization. It was not that the broodmother was too strong, but that the human civilization was too weak. Compared to the previous 8 civilizations, not counting Lin Feng, human civilization was probably the weakest. Sages, let's restore Maple Leaf City first, appease all humans, and restore peace to human society. I will think of a way to increase the overall strength of humanity. With that, Lin Feng returned to his normal size and flew into Maple Leaf City to look for Chuchan and Zhang Qiji. The sages were left behind, dumbfounded and slightly awkward. What can Sage Lin Feng do to increase the overall strength of humanity? All the sages were very curious, but if Lin Feng did not say it, they could not ask. However, if Lin Feng really had a way to increase the overall strength of humanity, that would be humanity's blessing.